All right, after the US intercepted an Iranian supertanker, they went on to seize a second one, also called a supertanker. So, what kind of ship is this second tanker? And what about the first one? After the incident with the first cargo ship, it basically forced Xi Jinping into a corner. So, what's really going on here? Now it's all out in the open for the world to see. What's the real story? That's the first topic I want to bring to everyone today. The second topic is that today marks either the last day or the last 2 days of the deadline for the US-Iran negotiations. So, is there actually any negotiation going on? Not only is there none, but both sides are basically getting ready for war and preparing to start fighting again, with the threat of conflict hanging heavily in the air. The Strait of Hormuz or Iran suddenly doesn't seem so important anymore. Why do I say that? I have my reasons. So why is that? That's the detailed topic I'm bringing you today. Also, South Korea has now managed to annoy the United States as well. South Korea can't seem to make up its mind between the US and China, which is making the US quite unhappy. So what's changing in that area? Welcome to Good Morning America, brought to you by Feng Wei. Hello to our YouTube viewers and to all our listeners on Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley FM 96.1. Good morning, everyone. All right, let's talk about this. The Iran war ceasefire has lasted for 2 weeks, and today's the last day. Tomorrow is the deadline. As for the Trump administration, they've extended it by 1 day to Wednesday. It was originally supposed to be Tuesday. So will both sides negotiate? Will these talks actually happen? Will Vance go to Islamabad, Pakistan? We'll talk about that in a bit. First, let's discuss yesterday's big headline, the mystery behind the hot news. What exactly was on that Iranian supertanker that the U.S. intercepted? All right, let's do a quick recap. Yesterday in the Gulf of Oman, which is right at the border between Pakistan and Iran, the U.S. military was tracking an Iranian supertanker flying the Iranian flag. This tanker, called the Tasca, belongs to the Islamic Republic of Iran's shipping lines, which is a state-owned shipping company. This ship stopped at Taikang Port in China on March 25th to load cargo, and then between March 29th and 30th, it went to Galan Port in southern China to load more cargo. The land port is a port in Zhuhai. It's actually Zhuhai's chemical handling port. You might be able to guess what that means. Here, they loaded and unloaded sodium perchlorate, which is a type of missile fuel. Then, on the way to Iran, the ship stopped again on April 12th at Port Klang in Malaysia. The waters near this port have weak law enforcement, so it's basically an unregulated area where ship-to-ship cargo transfers happen all the time. All in all, you can see that this Iranian ship, the Tasca, has been busy the whole way, selectively loading all kinds of things. Then the ship heads west, and its final destination is Iran's Bandar Abbas port. Then, as it was approaching Iran, it was intercepted by the U.S. Navy. After being stopped, the ship immediately went full speed ahead, trying to break through the blockade. This made the U.S. military suspicious. What exactly are you carrying that makes you so desperate to push forward? After patiently following for 6 hours, the U.S. military fired 3 5-inch naval gun shells, damaging its engine room and disabling its propulsion. Then, the U.S. forces boarded the ship. That's basically what happened. This ship was 295 meters long. That's about 970 feet. Yesterday, I said 970 meters. Sorry, that was a mistake. Let me correct that. It's 970 feet. Its designed capacity is about 5,000 standard 30-foot shipping containers. So what was inside? Of course, once the U.S. military got hold of it, they immediately started investigating. But what was officially announced? They didn't say. However, Trump, in an interview with CNBC today, said the following. Basically what he meant was that Iran was using the ceasefire period to stockpile weapons again, and then this ship was probably a gift from the Chinese Communist Party to Iran. But what really surprised me was when he said, I used to think I was good friends with Xi Jinping. We'd already reached a consensus between us, but it's fine, it's war after all, that's just how it is. So let me translate it. Basically it means, of course it was you. I knew it was you all along, and I'll remember this. This whole thing actually put Xi Jinping in a really awkward spot because a few days ago, Trump specifically said, I wrote a letter to Xi Jinping asking if he was supporting Iran in the war, and Xi Jinping said, no, I'm not. Then Trump went around telling everyone, right? He said he wasn't. Well, that's how it was. But now it's out in the open. So now Xi Jinping is actually even more embarrassed, really awkward. This is what you call awkward, but it's not the scariest thing. What's even scarier, in my opinion, this is Feng Wei's commentary, the scariest thing is that Trump didn't insult Xi Jinping or say anything harsh. That's the most frightening part. You know how Trump talks about Europe? He says all kinds of nasty things, calls them paper tigers, says things like, if you don't help me, I won't help you, I'll remember this, and so on. He really says some harsh stuff. He says harsh things, but it doesn't necessarily mean he'll act harshly because he relies on his words to have an effect. He knows that talking can get results. But what does it mean if he doesn't even say anything? If he doesn't say anything harsh, it means he doesn't want to talk. He just wants to act. So doesn't this fit that old saying in international politics? A dog that wants to bite doesn't bark. A dog that barks doesn't bite. So Xi Jinping was caught lying to the whole world, caught red-handed by Trump. Trump doesn't bother with harsh words. He just says, it's fine, it's just war. That's all he says. So actually, the consequences are pretty serious, and Trump knows it full well. Now let me tell you all a joke. So what should Xi Jinping do in this situation? He actually needs a way out. Does he have one? Yes, I think Xinhua news agency has already prepared the press release. They put out this kind of press release a few times every month, but for some reason they keep dragging their feet and don't release it. Let me help Xinhua release this press release, okay? Let me help Xi Jinping help Chairman Xi get out of this mess. This is called China's Xinhua News Agency. According to Xinhua News Agency, an unemployed drifter from Liangjiahe village in Shanxi, someone named Bao So-and-so, has been going around scamming people in places like Zhengding and Hebei, Fujian, Zhejiang, and Shanghai. Later, he snuck into Beijing. Earlier this month, Bao So-and-so instructed migrant workers Li So-and-so, Chen So-and-so, and Zheng So-and-so to load illegally trafficked suspected materials, sodium perchlorate and ammonium perchlorate, onto a foreign cargo ship at Gaoyang port in Zhuhai, attempting to make huge profits, but was intercepted by the U.S. military. Of the suspects, one is arrested and two are fleeing. Police are tracking the others. See, that's enough to clear this with Trump, right? Why? Because it's how many major Chinese cases are solved. Everyone knows about the serious and notorious cases in China. In fact, when it comes to these criminals, you don't even need to chase them down. You immediately know who they are. They're always unemployed drifters or people without a steady job or migrant workers or temp workers, right? It's basically always these types of people. You see, in China, so many news reports about major and special cases are always like this. It's always these kinds of people, as if no one else ever commits crimes. So when Xinhua News Agency releases a standard press release, it can help President Xi get out of a tight spot. So what do you think? Do y'all agree or not? The draft I wrote for Xinhua News Agency, is it good? The U.S. Navy, besides operating outside the Strait of Hormuz, has also announced that it will enforce the law in all the world's seas, stopping and inspecting any vessels related to Iran. So, after intercepting this arms ship, okay, for now I'll call it the arms ship Tesco. After what I just mentioned about Tesco, the U.S. Department of Defense announced today that in the Pacific, in the waters between Sri Lanka and Indonesia, they peacefully boarded a Marshall Islands registered cruise ship called Tiffany. This ship, well, previously, it was sanctioned by the United States for allegedly smuggling Iranian crude oil. It's part of the so-called shadow fleet that helps Iran transport crude oil. There are about 570 ships in this shadow fleet that assist Iran in moving this crude oil. So this ship is an ultra-large crude oil tanker known as a VLCC, which stands for Very Large Crude Carrier. It's specifically designed to transport crude oil, and it's 330 meters long, longer than a Tesco store. And the ship itself weighs 160,000 tons, so it's not just a 100,000-ton giant, but a 160,000-ton giant. When fully loaded with 2 million barrels of crude oil, its carrying capacity can reach up to 300,000 tons. So that's the situation. This ship has long been suspected of being involved in smuggling Iranian crude oil. It's a typical member of what's called a shadow fleet. What is a shadow fleet? I've talked about this with everyone before. They sail with everything turned off, so no one knows who they are. It's just a ship passing by. This is a violation of international maritime conventions. Normally, ships are supposed to have their identification on and broadcast their identity along the way, saying who they are, to help with navigation and shipping management. But these guys sneak around, acting like pirates, or more like thieves, slipping around everywhere. Because of this, they often carry out ship-to-ship transfers in Asian waters, especially near Singapore. In other words, this happens on the high seas, not in port, because that way they can avoid supervision and no one can see what they're doing. They connect with another ship at sea, hook up the pipes, and then transfer cargo from one ship to the other, usually oil, right? You can't really move anything anywhere else. How would you do it without a crane? So that's basically the situation. They help Iran transport oil, but at the same time, they have to avoid sanctions. That's what this is about. This is called dark activity, meaning they're sailing in stealth mode. Alright, so after the US used force to seize the Iranian container ship called Tesco on April 19th, this was the second force action against Iran-related shipping within just 2 days. President Trump said, "We've already started doing this. If I wanted to, I could seize 5 more ships, could take 5 more if I wanted." When the Tiffany cruise ship was intercepted, it was done peacefully. There was no conflict. However, the US military did deploy 2 helicopters to drop off Marines directly onto the ship. The US military stated that this operation was in accordance with international law and was part of what they called an expanded version of the Economic Fury Sanctions Plan. The goal was to cut off Iran's oil export revenues. So this operation highlights how the US continues to ramp up pressure on Iran just as the 2-week temporary ceasefire is about to expire. At the same time, Iran's Revolutionary Guard has also been intercepting oil tankers from other countries in the Strait of Hormuz. So that's the current situation. Now, let me ask you, are you an old friend of the channel or are you new here? If this is your first time, I welcome you to subscribe. If you've watched for a couple of days, you'll probably know that what I do here is explain the complex world in a simple, straightforward way, using plain language. That's my style. I'm Feng Wei. I like to turn the news into a story so everyone can easily understand it. It's really easy to understand. In addition, I also analyze the reasoning behind the news. If you want to get this kind of news report and analysis first thing every morning, please subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell, okay? Yes, just 10 seconds of your time can save you an hour every morning. Alright, so let's talk about this. Supposedly, the US and Iran are supposed to be negotiating today in Islamabad, Pakistan. But did the negotiations actually happen? Did the US delegation go to Pakistan? We don't know if Vice President Vance went to Pakistan or not. We don't know if Iran went to Pakistan either. There are so many unknowns. Most likely they didn't go, so there were no peace talks. As for the ceasefire agreement, it was originally set to expire tonight, but now, because Trump is being especially tough, it's been extended to tomorrow night, Wednesday night. Trump said that if an agreement isn't reached by then, it's extremely unlikely he'll extend the ceasefire. In other words, after 8 p.m. on April 22nd, fighting will resume. At the same time, both sides are preparing ammunition. This is according to Trump. Both sides are getting ready to restart the war. He said Iran has a lot of ammunition, most of which is transported over bridges. We'll blow up all the bridges, he said, so they won't be able to move their supplies. Haggai also said, during the ceasefire, we saw you moving weapons around. We saw everything. We know everything. So that's the situation. It means no matter where you try to hide, you won't be able to get away. Previously, President Trump had warned that if Iran refused the conditions put forward by the United States, all the bridges and power plants across Iran would be destroyed. Meanwhile, the US is also maintaining a blockade outside the strait. They've already forced 27 Iran-related ships back to Iranian ports and intercepted 2 ships outside. As for the Wall Street Journal, well, late yesterday they reported that Iran had 20 ships break out, but just now this morning I saw on Fox News, on Fox and Friends, they said, "That's fake news. Nothing like that happened." Then, on Monday, Trump wrote on Truth Social that this blockade is destroying Iran. He said that until a deal is reached, we won't lift the blockade. Iran is losing $500 million every day, and this kind of loss just can't be sustained for long. It can't be sustained. Yeah. President Trump also said, "I saw fake news saying that I'm under pressure to reach a deal." He said that's complete nonsense, that he's not under any pressure at all. But all of this is going to move along pretty quickly. Trump also said in an interview with CNBC that he expects the US and Iran will reach a great deal. Then the host asked him why. Why do you say that? He said, "We've already destroyed their navy, taken out their air force, and toppled their leaders. I think they have no choice. In the end, they'll have to sign." But he said after we took out their leaders, in some ways it made things more complicated. But as for the remaining leaders, they'll be more rational. Really? Some are, some aren't. Let's talk about one who isn't. Who is it? This person is very important. The person I'm showing you here is called Ahmad Vahidi. He is the newly appointed commander-in-chief of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. He's a brigadier general, 68 years old this year. So Vahidi, back in 1979, when he was 21, he took part in Khomeini's Islamic Revolution. He was one of the earliest members to join the Revolutionary Guard, and then quickly rose through the ranks in the military. He first served as the deputy director of the Revolutionary Guard's intelligence unit, then became the director, and later participated in establishing Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security. He was specifically in charge of overseas operations, and from 1988 to 1997, he served as the first commander of the Quds Force of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. This is the branch of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard dedicated to exporting the revolution. They specialized in subversive activities abroad. In 1998, he handed over command to someone who later became very famous, Qasem Soleimani. During Trump 1.0, Soleimani was killed in a strike ordered by Trump. So what about this caucasity? Later on, he went on to serve as Deputy Minister of Defense, then became Minister of Defense, then Minister of the Interior, and then again as Minister of Internal Affairs, and eventually became the Deputy Commander of the Revolutionary Guard, after the previous commander was taken out on March 1st. He then took over as the Commander-in-Chief of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, making him one of the most powerful military figures in Iran, or you could say he became the man in charge. Not only did he work his way up through the military ranks over several decades, but he also has extensive political and administrative experience. He is known as a highly capable bureaucrat and a wartime leader. Within the Revolutionary Guard, he is also very well connected, so he's a classic hardliner and a key driving force behind Iran's overseas terrorist activities and domestic crackdowns. In 1994, he orchestrated a suicide bombing in Argentina that killed and injured nearly 400 people. So Argentina has been pursuing and trying to capture him, though of course Argentina can't actually get to Iran. But as things stand, he's seen as even more radical and hardline than the previous commander of the Revolutionary Guard. So now he's already taken action to sideline the civilian government, and he's cut off the president's contact with Ibrahim Raisi. Basically, the Iranian president can't even meet with the newly appointed leader, whether you call him Khamenei or whatever nickname you use. In short, you could say that in his hands, it's a situation of holding the emperor hostage to command the feudal lords. So basically, the hardliners have come to power and have started to gain the upper hand in Iran's internal power struggle. He controls the most powerful armed forces in Iran, so his rise really reflects the further militarization of the Iranian regime in times of crisis. This is a trend of the Revolutionary Guard's influence expanding. So what does that mean? It means that within Iran, fighting takes precedence over cooperation, and the forces favoring conflict are getting stronger. So honestly, it really looks like the US and Iran might end up fighting again. That's the situation, right? Yeah. All right, that's the end of this little story. Could I ask you for a small favor? Do you have friends who get bombarded with all kinds of information every day, but the more they read, the more confused they get, and they don't know what to trust? Share this episode with your friends. In this age of information overload, what we do is organize all that complicated information into a clearer thread. So just go ahead and share it. Just a little reminder for our viewers. All right, next up, let's talk about whether the US and Iran failed to reach an agreement. So what was the result? Does this mean the stock market's going to crash and oil prices will go up? Let me first take a look at today's stock market. When I was preparing for the show, that was about an hour ago, so let's see how things are looking right now. This morning, the stock market was actually up quite a bit, but now it's basically flat, maybe down just a little, pretty much holding steady. So right now, both the stock market and oil prices are flat. That's the situation. So what's going on? Why is it like this? Well, of course, there are a couple of reasons. One is that United Health, the American health insurance company, released its earnings report today. Their first quarter earnings beat Wall Street's expectations. The company's stock price went up by 7.7%, so 7.7%, making it the leader in the stock market today. But when it comes to oil prices didn't surge. There was no big spike, and the stock market definitely didn't crash. In fact, there were even some gains. The reason for this is because, let me explain the reason to everyone. Behind all this, countries have already started to automatically adjust and look for new oil transportation routes. Basically, the world is telling Iran, your Strait of Hormuz used to be important, but today we just don't need it anymore. Why do I say that? There are three reasons. First, a large number of tankers are now changing course and heading to the Gulf of the United States, Texas and Louisiana, to load oil and natural gas, as well as to Venezuela. So the world's oil and natural gas centers of gravity are truly shifting. Second, a large amount of Middle Eastern oil is being transported overland to Saudi Arabia, using oil pipelines to the Red Sea, specifically to the port of Yanbu. From there, the oil is loaded onto ships and exported. So what happened next? This pipeline was built in the 1980s during the Iran-Iraq War. At that time, Saudi Arabia wanted to reduce its dependence on the Strait of Hormuz, facing the same issues as today, right? So they built a large port here at Yanbu. In fact, they built two ports, Yanbu North Port and Yanbu South Port. It's a major oil loading port. Once the oil is loaded, it can head north to the Suez Canal or south through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, so oil can be shipped out from there. Right now, only about 35% of all the oil that needs to be exported from the Gulf goes through here. But the capacity is constantly expanding. It's growing every day. Now, you might ask, doesn't Iran have the Houthi forces, right? The Houthis could blockade the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Well, wouldn't that work? Wouldn't that basically be like having a second Strait of Hormuz? If that's what Iran is thinking, then my answer is just 3 words: in your dreams. Why is that? Even though the Houthis were propped up by Iran, after 7 weeks of war, what have the Houthis actually done? They fired 2 missiles at Israel, both of which were intercepted, and after that, they did nothing. Absolutely nothing. Why's that? The first reason is that, starting from last March, the US bombed the Houthis for 53 days, targeting their radar, air defense systems, missile launch sites, drone bases, weapon storage areas, in other words, all their facilities. They also hit command centers and every other target. Basically, last year, the US hit the Houthis just like they hit Iran this year. They went through the whole list once already. The Houthis were basically forced to the ground. They felt the US military was just too powerful. That's the first reason. The second reason might be even more important. Iran has run out of money. If Iran doesn't have money, can it still be the Houthis' backer? Don't the Houthis have to look out for themselves now? Don't they want to stay alive? So, because of this, it's clear the Houthis are acting out of self-preservation, and most likely won't try to block the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. This is different from Hezbollah and Lebanon. Hezbollah doesn't care about their own lives. If their boss says go, they'll throw themselves into the fight no matter what. The Houthis aren't really like that. The Houthis are more like, let me think this over. America is just too powerful. Do I really want to be Iran's number 2? Even Iran can't handle it. Am I supposed to take the hit? So they hold back, and if they hold back, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait stays open. Now, as I was saying earlier about this port, as for this Yanbu port, it has another oil loading line that can be used. So this basically solves the transportation issue in the Persian Gulf. The third possibility is this: Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Kuwait. If you look at this line, the whole route runs down like this. They are planning to build another pipeline to transport oil directly to the Mediterranean, so they wouldn't even need to go through the Suez Canal. It could be shipped straight out. And if everyone works together to make this happen, there would only be one country left with oil that's hard to transport, and that country is called Iran. At that point, who would still need the Strait of Hormuz? The Strait of Hormuz would end up only being able to blockade one country. That's Iran, the country farthest from the Red Sea in the Mediterranean. So in other words, if Iran tries to choke the world by blocking the Strait of Hormuz, it would end up just choking itself. So Trump's war has already taken away Iran's biggest bargaining chip. Some people said a few days ago that Iran's trump card was its nuclear bomb. Even if their uranium enrichment hasn't succeeded, their real weapon is the Strait of Hormuz. But now the Strait of Hormuz is useless. And Trump's so-called Trump economy is now recovering and showing its strength again. That's why, basically, neither side is even talking, and the stock market remains completely steady. It's just like that. Plus, oil prices aren't rising at all, because everyone thinks this whole thing isn't important. Yeah, that's just how things are.